All right, so we've spent quite a bit of time in this course importing CSV files into our Jupyter Notebook with the read CSV method called directly on the Pandas library. And now the time has come for us to execute this process in reverse, to take a Pandas data frame and export it to a CSV file. So I'll begin by executing our code from the previous lessons to load our online CSV into a local baby names data frame. And let's say we've completed all of the operations and methods that we wanted to do, and this is our final beautiful looking snazzy data frame, and we want to export it to a CSV file. So I'm going to reference my baby names data frame, and the method here is called toCSV, and there is an underscore there between those two words. Open my parentheses, and the only required argument here is the name that I want to give this new CSV file. So I'm going to put double quotes. It's going to be a string, and let's say I'm going to call this one NYC baby names. Now, it's important that you include the .csv extension. In fact, it won't work if you don't include it. So even though we're calling the toCSV method, we still have to include the .csv extension in our file name. So let's execute this and see what happens. There's not going to be any kind of visible approval or confirmation, but if I navigate to my Jupyter Navigator, and I'm currently in the same directory where my Jupyter Notebook is, and I scroll down, you'll see that this NYC baby names CSV has appeared here. So what Pandas is going to do by default is to export the file to the exact same directory where the current Jupyter Notebook that's executing the code is located. So my input and output notebook is in this directory, so that's where it's exported the NYC baby names file. Let's go back into my notebook, and let's now explore a couple available parameters on this method. So first, by default, the export process will include the index of the data frame, which is this right now, this default pandas numeric index. Usually, unless I've set a custom index with something like the setIndex method, I generally don't want to include the index because it's just going to be a random untitled column to the left of my data that just says 0, 1, 2, and so on. So in order to exclude the index, we can write the index parameter and switch its argument from the default true to false. Now when I execute this, we're not going to get, again, any kind of confirmation process, but what's actually happening here is that this CSV that we just generated has overwritten the one that we created a minute ago. So if the file names are identical, this execution will overwrite the existing CSV file in the directory. You have to be careful with that. I can tell you actually a story about one of the first times I explored pandas. I opened the file called data.csv and I did a whole bunch of operations, and then I wanted to export it, and I completely forgot about my original file name, and I said, well, what do I want to call my exported file? And of course I wanted data.csv because it's pretty obvious, it can apply to any situation. And I exported the data.csv file, and it overwrote the original input file that I used for that notebook. So be careful, because Jupyter Notebook and Pandas will not offer you any kind of warning or any kind of message of would you like to overwrite this file, it already exists. It's just going to go ahead and do it. So whenever you execute this command, just keep in mind, watch out for the name that you're providing, and if it already exists, it will be overwritten. Let's explore one or two more additional parameters here. Let's say I want to only include a couple columns from my original data frame. So for example, I want birth year here, the NM column, which is the name, and the count. So predictably, there is a convenient columns parameter on the toCSV method, and you can give it a Python list of strings where every string is going to represent the column that you want to include. So I can do something like birth year and NM and CNT. Execute again with Shift Enter. No confirmation, but once again that NYC baby names.csv file has overwritten the last version of that file in the same directory, and that's it. Finally, I just want to offer one additional parameter. You really only need to use this one if you're running into a common error that I get, which is basically encoding. Sometimes if you're working with foreign characters like Latin characters or Greek characters or things like German umlauts, you might receive an error message below the cell that says something like unable to encode character in this position or in this byte. It basically means Pandas doesn't know how to export it properly. So a common solution to that is to include a parameter called encoding and provide it an argument in a string of UTF-8. So UTF-8 is just a popular character set. It's a collection of different characters that basically includes all the modern characters of all the modern languages. Not everything, of course, but probably the most extensive set for kind of the typical stuff you might see in the modern world. So if you're ever running into any encoding issues, this is the first recommendation that I have to offer. It usually works 80% of the time for me. If you're still running into issues, it's really going to be related to the specific character that's found in your data set that pandas can't export. So for specific problems like that, I do recommend sticking with the classic Google and Stack Overflow approach. But this is a quick introduction to the toCSV method called directly on a data frame. It generates the CSV file directly for you. You can customize whether you want the index included. You can customize what columns you want to include if you don't want to, let's say, include the whole data frame, which is the default. And if you're running into any encoding errors, you can provide a argument of UTF-8 to the encoding parameter, and that should work most of the time to fix your problems. And in the next lesson, we'll start talking about how we can read and write Excel files instead of CSV files. So I'll see you there.